It's now time for Believe It or Not with Justin and Goose.
Hello, I'm Justin Perkins, and some of the best things in life are not quite believable.
Jot 'em down, store. Love from Abner. My name's Goose, and welcome to the first ever episode of Believe It or Not, spelled Knott. Justin, why did we call it Believe It or Not, spelled that particular way?
Because both of us are atrocious at spelling. No, because we're both from a small little county in eastern Kentucky called Knott County, Kentucky. A fact I know me and you both are very proud of. And it's a wonderful and different place.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we're going to be doing this from time to time. We're going to be talking about everything. We're going to be talking urban legends, true stories that you may have never heard of, and mostly, hopefully, most of our content will be Kentucky related.
Well, Eastern Kentucky has history its own, a dialect its own, and a way of life its own, and I think it'd be good to get a lot of that out. I don't know how many counties in our area has a booger branch, a booger holler, a booger road, and that may sound like an odd name to people from away from here, but that's in reference to the boogeyman. Those are places that told children to stay away from. And we have haints and haunts, which are very similar things that a lot of other places don't have. So it's an interesting history, and it's a culture that is very quick to believe someone if they give you a good, honest story, and it's a culture that is quick to question something if it sounds a little bit too good to be true. So, you'll hear these things, and it's up to you to determine if you believe it or not.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about a story, and then after we get done, we're going to say if we believe it or if not, and why not. Before we get started, Justin, have you ever heard of the Sack Man? Have you ever heard that urban legend?
No, I have not.
Okay. He was a supposedly, and my grandfather told me that he heard a story when he was little. The Sack Man was a man that would come out from people's gardens, and he had a sack over his shoulder, and he put bad children in his sack, and he would always take them off, and they would never see him again. It was called the Sack Man.
That is an interesting story. I've not heard that.
Yes. Today, we're going to talk about the Pike County UFO sighting from 2012. For those of you that may not be familiar with this, on October 16th, 2012, residents of Pike County looked high in the sky to find a strange sight. Amateur astronomer Alan Epling described it to a local reporter as looking like two fluorescent bulbs, side by side, parallel, shining very brightly. It would get so bright that they would seem to emerge, and it could be seen clearly with the naked eye, Epling said. Then it would dim almost invisible. It wasn't anything I recognized, definitely not an airplane, and I've never seen a helicopter that looked that way. Epling wasn't the only one who noticed this. Police in Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee also got phone calls from concerned citizens. Calls were made to nearby airports, but government officials could shed no light on the unidentified flying object that was said to have reached an altitude of 60,000 feet. This remained more or less stationary for a few hours, suggesting that it was tethered to the ground somehow or hovering under its own power. Justin, before we continue, and this also made national news, did you see this for yourself when this happened?
No, I didn't see it firsthand. I seen some of the news reports, and I actually had to refresh my memory on the video because the video was a little different than I had remembered it. But I do remember it happening and hearing about it the day it happened, but I did not see it.
Okay. Well, about a year after, Rich Duvall knows what the object was. Sitting in a conference room in Mountain View, California, he beams proudly as he runs a YouTube clip of the whole incident that was featured on newscast. The mysterious craft was, quote, his doing, or at least the work of his Google team. The people in Pike County were witnessing a test of Project Loon, a breathtaking, ambiguous plan to bring internet to a huge as yet unconnected humanity via thousands of solar-powered, high-pressure balloons floating some 60,000 feet above Earth. Project Loon balloons would circle the globe in rings, connecting wirelessly to the internet with a handful of ground stations and pass signal to one another in kind of a daisy chain. Each would act as a wireless station for an area about 25 miles in diameter below, using a variant of Wi-Fi to provide broadband to anyone with a Google-issued antenna. This was meant to be low-cost internet to those who otherwise wouldn't have it, and it would help smartphones connect to make it them more quickly become cheap. That was the whole explanation. Over a year later, that it was a Google internet balloon and part of Project Loon. I've not done much research on Project Loon, but for me personally, that throws up a big red flag. I do not think it was Google.
I don't know that it was. That's a very impractical way to do internet. I think Elon has the right idea with his satellites. It's a very good way to make your internet service proprietary by requiring them to have the Google antenna, but it doesn't seem logical that you're going to float that many balloons for that long. I did look at a couple balloons that are similar to that, and I saw some interesting stuff.
Well, those did exist in 2012 because I've talked to people in tech before, and they said that those did exist. They didn't really start becoming popular until 5 to 6 years later, and that they would be used in areas similar to ours, but they would also be used in cities like Kansas City, Missouri, Austin, Texas, Provo, Utah. They would use them in those places to provide low-cost internet service. The reason that I don't think that's what it was is, number one, was you had the police get calls. If you're going to have something that high of an altitude, you would have to get a permit from the FFA. Okay? Now, you would also inform your local airport, your local police department, hey, we've got this FFA permit, we're going to be doing this because it's tied to the ground. From what I have researched this, the police, state, local, counties, they knew nothing. They had no idea. No airports knew anything about this. I just find that odd.
It could be the reason why it took them a year to confess, if it indeed was them. We live in a very, very litigious society, and the opportunity to sue is always prevalent. And maybe they had some lawyers dotting some I's and crossing some T's to make sure that, they're not in any violation, because sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, but in that case they probably did. That is a problem with our reporting from the government, is if it was something like a UFO, well, they would just sit on it and never report it. If it is something easily explainable, a lot of times they'll just go, oh, well, that's what that was, and never take the time to tell anybody. But I would think that them taking that long to come out, some more of them taking the time to make sure legally we didn't cross any lines, or if we did, we can minimize the bleeding and keep the repercussions as low as possible.
And this was 2012, and Eric C. Kahn was still in business at the time. So you're exactly right.
It could have been tied to the Eric C. Kahn statue. That could be where they had it tethered from.
Well, was there an Eric C. Kahn statue?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. Actually, it was Lincoln. Yeah. It's made just like the Lincoln Monument. Yeah. I always assumed it was him, but I never looked close enough. Yeah. Maybe it was Lincoln.
But he did have himself as a mannequin sitting on billboards. Like
yeah, he's not vain at all.
I would say there's a lot of people that like to tie him to a balloon and let him float away. But not to get off track, getting back to her story. Like I said, it was over a year later. And people that do... and Mr. Epling that noticed this, he's an amateur astronomer. I'm sure he knows the difference between a balloon, airplanes, helicopters, planets, stuff that he may see, through his telescopes and stuff. But he said he never saw anything like this. How would a balloon dim down and almost get invisible and then come back bright? And and do the same thing over and over.
That part's not as hard. That part is due to the material. The material may look, on a lot of these balloons, translucent from the back, but you notice they said it was solar powered.
Right.
And a lot of time with this translucent material, it's not a solar panel like we think of the black solar panel. The surface area is the more important part, and the light reflection, it will play a part in that, but my guess would be that as the balloon flickered to the dim side, you were seeing more of the translucent side on the back, the dull side, and as it got brighter, it was a shift in the brighter side of the balloon coming out to the front.
Okay. Now, Alan Epling, the guy that spotted these, said they look like two fluorescent bulbs side by side. Now, you have UFOs. You have the classic saucer shape. You have the triangle, and the bulb ones. Those are. Let's say I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry there. But the bulb
like
ones,
the cigar shape.
yes, they're tubes. Tube UFOs is what they call those.
Kind of like the Tic Tac deal.
Yes, definitely. Those are spotted all over the world. Typically, you find more reports of those over military bases or bodies of water. Why? I don't know. You don't typically find that description over a power plant like you normally would. Normally bodies of water or military bases. And just the fact that the law enforcement or local government knew nothing about this. And like you said, sometimes it is better to ask for forgiveness versus permission. But if you're going to do something like this, if you're really going to test this out, and if this first was the real deal and it worked, why aren't we using this technology today, 9 years later?
I think it's impractical. I don't think it was a very good idea. And I think Musk beat him to the punch with the satellite deal. It's a lot more stable platform. It's a lot more reliable platform, and it just seems to be. Look, the balloon thing, it just doesn't work. And it's ironic, the Roswell crash was always considered a balloon incident by the government, or stated to be a balloon incident by the government. But in this situation, to be completely honest, when I first seen the video, I viewed it with less kind of intent to investigate than I did this last time. And there's things about it in certain frames that make me think this is most definitely a solid craft. But there's things about it, especially the way it seems to wave. I can see the balloon argument for the first time in one of these. And it's ironic because it's the excuse for unidentified flying objects that I've never put any stock in. And this is the one time that I look at it and I go, maybe.
Well, okay, let me throw something at you. Let's say, for the sake of this story, that Rich Duvall did put an internet balloon up. Okay, let's say that balloon attracted a UFO. So in some pictures or video, you could possibly have a UFO versus the balloon, which could describe two side by side that were, tube UFOs versus a Project Loon balloon.
Well, like I said, there are images I've seen that it has a different characteristic, and it seems more solid than it does in others. So that's possible, and it's new technology. If they're looking at us as a civilization, one of the most interesting things to them are going to be new technologies that we have. So that would be logical. I could see that. But with the Epling guy that's seen it, he kind of never really committed to one thing or the other. The most conclusive thing he said is it's definitely a UFO because it can't be identified. But he did say on WYMT, I think it was WYMT, that he felt it was of this earth. He did feel it was ours. He just didn't know what it was. And, I didn't hear that until after I'd seen it. So that didn't really taint me looking at it. But I do see similarities in some of the other balloons I've seen. And and this object and the way it moved and its mannerisms.
That makes sense. And in the story, he says it's definitely not an airplane, and I've never seen a helicopter that looked like this. So he didn't rule out that it wasn't a helicopter, just one that he possibly could have never seen. So for argument's sake, I'm 50-50 on this. I could go either way on this. The reason why I could say it's totally false and it was something is because they used the old "it's a balloon" thing, and you've already touched on that a little bit. The reason that I could believe it is, they look like two fluorescent bulbs, which are two UFOs. So I'm split on this.
To me, when I heard they're now saying it's a balloon, I honestly automatically went into it thinking, no, I'm gonna look this harder because I don't like my cue. I don't like that excuse ever. That's not a good. It's not a good option to me because it most of the time, just based on the shape and behavior of the balloon, you don't get that. This thing really doesn't behave as much like a balloon in its shape because you don't see something that looks largely inflated until it looks to me like you have the fluorescent shaped things that look like two large cylinders, almost like buoys on a pontoon, and then between it you have stretched this fabric that is actually probably intended, I assume, to catch the sunlight. So in regards to it being a balloon, probably 6 out of 10 on the possibilities of it being an actual alien craft, or even an American, light project craft. Probably a 3 out of 10. And I honestly started out, just based on my memory, kind of in the opposite direction on both of those.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first Believe It or Not, spelled Knott, with Justin Perkins and me, Goose. If you liked what you heard, we will be doing this on every Here to Chew Bubblegum podcast show. We'll be playing clips, if not a whole segment on the radio show. You can always email Justin and myself at believeitorknott at heretochewbubblegum.com. Again, Believe It or Not, spelled Knott, at heretochewbubblegum.com. Next week, we're going to be talking about a story that's not Kentucky related, but it is fascinating. And we're going to be talking about IBM and their involvement with the Nazis. Had you heard of this before I emailed you this talking point?
Like, remotely. I'd heard the reference, and I want to say I saw something on the History Channel years ago about it, and I know through a separate thing I researched that there was some connections, not only with them but some other companies, but I'm not as well versed on it as I'd like to be, so I'm kind of interested in looking into that because that kind of stuff always kind of piques my interest.
And I don't know if I've shared all these with you. I may have. If not, I am sorry. Some of the things coming up within the next month or so, Justin and I, segments we'll be talking about, will be, we'll have a ghost story from Kentucky. Of course, Halloween coming up in October, so we'll have a ghost story. We'll be talking about the White House UFO incident of 1952, the Blue People of Troublesome Creek, the ferry doors of Hazard, Kentucky, Russians from Mars. I know I've not told you about that one, Russians from Mars, and a Hazard, Kentucky incident that happened, I think, in 2014. It was either a mine explosion, as some people claim, or it could have been a UFO. I know you're familiar with that one. I think you are. Anyway, so I guess we're going to wrap it up this week. Don't forget that DebPitt.com will be at Friday Night Film Fest October 1st through the 3rd. For more information, check out FridayNightFilmFest.com. I want to say special thanks to Carlin for all the voiceover work. And don't forget about the new Midlife Crisis album available now. Be sure to check out CK Uncle Bill and the rest of the gang over at deadpit.com. Justin Perkins of Talk Junkie has been our guest on the show. Thank you again very much, Justin, for coming in and sitting in for Dirty Dan. He should be back next week. I want to remind everyone to check out Down on the Holler with Jordan and Brad. Don't forget about Seth's Daily Podcast. And if you're into spooky and paranormal, be sure to check out the spookyfamilypodcast.com. Justin, without giving much away, how fun was it to pick the bracket with Elliot and Beagle and
it was extremely fun. I got cheated out of Gertie, and she's the only one that thinks logically like I do, especially when it comes to it. But it was extremely fun, and actually the opening of the show, it was dedicated to Elliot and the Spooky Family. They did what is possibly the greatest opening of a show ever when they guest hosted your show when it was still you in contact when you had to be out. And so that was an homage to them, and I think Elliot will get it as soon as he hears it.
Again, Justin, thank you very much for stopping by this week, and I'm very excited about working some more with you on Believe It or Not. Most of the Believe It or Not will be filmed in studio, so you'll be right here in the new studio with me, and looking forward to that. Also, don't forget about Rebecca Short on TikTok and Honest Rebecca Thoughts on Twitch. That'll do it for this week. We'll see you next week, and until then, so long for now.
Thanks for listening to Here to Chew Bubblegum. Tune in next time as we dive deeper into things the government doesn't want us to know.